In a lot of ways, the world of vocal synthesizers is a much more even playing field than the mainstream music industry. Not everybody who can write a song has the talent or the desire to hack it as a singer or as part of a band. But with Hatsune Miku or Gumi or whoever you want to play the star instead, hobbyists can work at their own pace, and those willing to put the work in can even make it their job without the same pressures as a traditional music career. But when Miku kicked off the first Vocaloid boom in 2007, not all fans could join the party and make music of their own. Vocaloid and Utao both started as Windows-only programs, and though Mac users got some options in the next few generations of it with things like Vocaloid Neo, full Apple compatibility for all voice banks and engines didn't become the standard until 2018, when Vocaloid 5 came out. And as business decisions go, fair enough. Reworking a program to accommodate multiple operating systems is a lot of work, and Apple didn't have nearly as much of the market cap back then. Hatsune Miku is slightly older than the first iPhone, and if that doesn't make longtime Vocaloid fans feel old, I don't know what will. Even so, a few enterprising Apple loyalists took it upon themselves to create a voice bank for their side of the OS divide. The results were probably less than what they'd hoped, and the GarageBand virtual singer idea never really took off in its own right. However, the bright, cute voice had promise, and she would soon find herself with a whole family of fellow Mac-themed voice banks, distributed and redistributed across various synth engines. Thus, the vocal synth fandom welcomed Macne Nana and the Macne series. The Macne series was initially developed by the Japanese sound tech companies MI7 and Act2, but the person who ultimately deserves the most credit for the whole project is the voice actress and singer Ikazawa Haruna. Ikazawa was most active as a performer in the 90s and early aughts, with roles in anime series like Hamtaro and Sergeant Frog and video games like Crash Bandicoot. On top of that, she also wrote a regular column in the magazine MacFan, titled Tensei Himego Vox Reginae Vox Dei, a somewhat tautological name which translates to Voice of the Princess, Voice of God. It was a spoof of an editorial in the major Japanese newspaper Asahi Shimbun, which translates to Voice of the People, Voice of God. Ikazawa's writings were, naturally, mostly about computer stuff, and she noted in 2009 that despite the recent explosion of popularity in vocal synthesizer music and technology, there were no options that could work with the Macintosh operating system yet. At the time, Vocaloid and Utao were pretty much the only singing synths, with any other voice tech focused mostly on text-to-speech. A Mac singer would probably need a whole new engine, which would have been a huge deal. But it also would have been a huge amount of work, and even more money. So rather than build a whole new type of software from scratch, Ikazawa teamed up with MI7 to make a vocal sound bank for use in Reason and GarageBand, where the sample files could be manipulated like any of the other built-in instruments. Macne translates to Mac sound, in the same way that Miku is first sound, Hatsune. In fact, there were plans to call her Macne Miku, but that, along with the rest of the most derivative elements, seemed to have been tossed pretty early in the design process. The new name, Nana, came from Ikazawa Haruna's own nickname. This first iteration of Macne Nana was released on March 28, 2009, and distributed through the company Act2. The Macne series was their only foray into vocal synth, and these days they mostly deal in Mac-friendly logistics tech, secure cloud storage, data migration, that sort of thing. If you bought this first package, you get a set of 104 AIFF sample files to port into GarageBand or Reason as an instrument, plus some art files with Nana's character mascot. She's meant to be about 15-ish, with a black and white and Granny Smith green color palette, and a round hat that's shaped kind of like an apple with a little stem sticking out. There was also a cheaper light version called Macne Nana Petit, which had fewer samples in it. Petit would eventually spin off into her own character, but I'll get back to that in a sec. In theory, the GarageBand instrument approach was a great idea, since people wouldn't have to learn a complicated new interface to use the product. In practice, however, processing something as complicated as human vocals through the system was often more trouble than it was worth. Inputting lyrics and notes was a lot more time-consuming than it was with Vocaloid or Utao, and it lacked a lot of those engines' editing features that you needed to really add some human-like emotion to the vocals. You could tweak the pitch and get an interesting sound, but ultimately, this version of Nana always sounded quite robotic no matter what you did. And a handful of artists were happy to make that work. While researching, I discovered a cute song called Black Snow by an artist called You that I really like. And a producer called Nama P released nearly a dozen songs with Mac voice banks in the 2 years or so after Nana's initial release. Not only with Nana herself, but with some of the additional members of the Macne family who followed her. First, as Petit's popularity with the fanbase increased, she was retooled to be a younger sister character rather than a miniature version of Nana. On September 30th, 2009, we met Macne Coco, who was retroactively named Macne Coco White after the surprise release of Macne Coco Black in June of 2010. Presented as Nana's older twin sisters, both were voiced by Inoue Kikuko, who was involved in the character design as well. She's the one who suggested their pink ponytails and specifically asked for them to be 17 years old. For whatever reason, Inoue's voice acting career has included a disproportionate number of 17-year-old characters, even as she's gotten older. It's become a bit of an in-joke with her fanbase that she'll always coyly say she's 17 when anybody asks her age, humorously drawing attention to herself and the fact that she is definitely much older than that. More recent vocal synth fans might better know that name as the voice provider for Vocaloid and Synthesizer V voice bank Haruno Sora, but again, we'll get back to that later. The one masculine voice bank of the series was Macne Papa, who, and you'll be shocked to learn this, is meant to be the girl's father. He was voiced by actor Nakata Joji, who had worked with Ikazawa previously on Sergeant Frog, but is probably better known for his role as Alucard in Hellsing. And finally, the last addition to the Macne series was Whisper Angel Sasayaki, voiced once more by Ikazawa. Unlike the other releases, Sasayaki is not meant to be a separate character, but a magical girl alter ego of Macne Petit. Sasayaki translates to whisper, and she is by far the breathiest voice out of the Macne series, best suited for very gentle, calm songs. Though vocal synth characters are often pretty sparse on the personal details, the Macne family was more fleshed out. Illustrator Akatsuki Gomoku created origin stories and official personalities for the family, though as with any vocal synth characters, these are open to being tweaked by the voice bank's users. Nana, for example, is meant to be cheerful and positive, if not especially bright, while Coco Black and White are the classic double act of the emotional free spirit and the calmer, more responsible straight man figure. The family owns and runs the Macne Cafe, but Papa is rarely there, traveling around the world for some unspecified job and sending gifts back to the girls from his adventures abroad. There's also Petit and her whole alter ego thing with Sasayaki, but I think that's mostly just for the aesthetic. As much fun as it would be, there has not in fact been a full-blown magical girl manga with her. These details were featured in 3 fan books published between 2009 and 2011 titled Macne Bon. More than a dozen other members of the Macne development team contributed to these books, which included concept art, comics, fully rendered illustrations, and photographs of and by Ikazawa. I couldn't find a full PDF of any of these books online or anything, but a lot of their content, mostly from the first book, has been uploaded to the Macne series wiki. The lore was further expanded upon in various standalone promotional illustrations and brand collabs, and the Macne Drama CD released in 2010, which contains some short in-character audio dramas and talks from the cast. Getting back to the music, though the Macne series was released for GarageBand and Reason, they were sold with an open license that allowed for the bass samples to be ported over to Utao, which accepts pretty much any sound source if you reformat them correctly. There's not that much original content made with any of the Macne Utao banks. I mean, if you look on the Vocaloid Lyrics Wiki or VocaDB, they have more songs listed for the Mac voice banks, but even adding both of these categories together for the whole family, I doubt there's more than 50, 60 originals in total. But the Utao banks were pretty popular among cover artists. The first time I heard any of them was in one of those My Favorite Vocaloid song medleys, where people showcase their tuning on several dozen Utao voice banks at a time. Though I couldn't tell you which cover exactly, there's way too many of them out there to keep track. Ironically, by the time the full series was released, some of these Utao users were also Mac users. In 2011, a Mac-friendly version of the software called Utao Synth came out, which meant that even the original target audience didn't have to use the GarageBand voice banks in GarageBand. Act 2 recognized the growing popularity of Nana in particular, and in February of 2012, they pulled her from the digital shelves to make way for a re-release. Macne Nana and Macne Petit 2S were released on their 3rd anniversary on March 29th of that year. These updated voice banks boasted new character illustrations and entirely new recordings, available in files that could work in Utao Synth pretty much right out the box. Nana 2S was also, in general, slightly softer and less childish sounding than the first release, further developing the difference between Nana and Petit from full and light versions to increasingly different sounding voices. Around the same time, Yamaha was working on a Mac release of their Vocaloid 3 engine, called Vocaloid Neo. Not every V3 voice bank would get a Neo release. And notably, none of the native English voice banks like Ivana would get one, though Miku and Gumi English meant that Western Mac users weren't entirely without options. But a character like Nana, whose whole thing was Mac compatibility, seemed like a perfect candidate for this new generation of voice banks. Of course, the quality of recording and programming required for Vocaloid was a huge jump from the GarageBand and Utao voice banks, and the existing team at Act 2 didn't have the budget for it. Ikazawa got in touch with the team at Yamaha, and she got approval for a commercial release pending a review of the project at 70% completion. However, Nana still needed a corporate partner to get her across the finish line, and then to serve as the distributor for the finished product. She found one in B-Plots Incorporated, a tech company that had also worked on Vocaloid's VY1, VY2, Lo Tiani, and Yanhei. The original plan had been to release a voice bank as early as January 2013, But Ikazawa was unsatisfied with the Japanese material she had already presented to Yamaha, and also wanted to challenge herself to release a voice bank in at least one other language, which ended up being English. I couldn't confirm how many languages she's totally fluent in, but even if it's only partial knowledge in each case, Ikazawa is still quite the polyglot. In addition to English, she also speaks enough Mandarin and French that they were candidates for voice banks at different times. And during my research, I also came across several clips of her speaking Spanish, though it isn't clear whether it was off the cuff or reading from a script. She'd even released music in English before the Vocaloid project took off, though whether this case counts for or against her fluency is debatable. In 2009, Avis Entertainment released the somewhat inexplicable album Pangkole, a showcase of 6 popular voice actresses singing iconic Western punk and alternative rock songs. I really cannot express just how bizarre a listening experience it was to hear Ikazawa with her cutesy voice squeaking her way through Green Day and the Sex Pistols, but she did it. The content exists, and I will be linking it so that you can be as baffled as I was, listeners. And, in fairness, she was far from the worst one on the album. Kadawaki Mai sang The Offspring's Pretty Fly for a White Guy after presumably drawing a short straw, and it doesn't sound like anybody involved with making that happen had a good time. Ikazawa's previous experience notwithstanding, adding another language to the roster did push Nana's release date back quite a bit. Again, I can't find the exact source for this beyond the wiki, but allegedly, Ikazawa re-recorded the Japanese samples 6 times before everybody was satisfied, and the English samples about 11. This made for over 1,000 hours of recording and editing and a grueling 15-hour workday. Despite the project's challenges, B-Platz was able to release Macne Nana V3 on January 31st, 2014, either as a physical bundle for both voice banks or as separate digital purchases. Those who had pre-ordered also got bonus files, including the 2S Macne Nana voice banks and some digital illustrations. Nana sounded somewhat different in Vocaloid than her original or her 2S release, mostly because of the different demands of the engines. All the sound samples for the Apple voice banks, for example, were the exact same length, 4 seconds. While I have no idea the kind of variety or nuanced material that would go into a Vocaloid sound library, since that's not really made public. Additionally, the Utao vocals tended to have a much lower optimum range after conversion. I've seen some conflicting information as to why. Either the sound files had actually had their pitch lowered in the conversion process somehow, or the different ways that the engines processed their samples meant that, in Utao, the samples that had already made up her lower range came out sounding better than the highest pitches, so they were used more. Regardless, Nana in Utao was Nana at her most powerful and mature sounding with most tuners. One of my favorite uses of her Utao bank is a cover by Kat Leone of Ago Anikipi's Double Lariat, originally with Luca. Part of why I like it so much is how well it showcases how different her voice can be. Nana sounds almost like a different character entirely, especially on the low notes in the song's verse that are well below the official optimum range of the V3 voice bank. Also, Kat Leone is a really good tuner, and she's able to coax a very human-sounding performance despite the fact that it's just a simple CV Utao bank, which are often quite choppy or flat. Nana as a Vocaloid, however, was made to sound as close as possible to how Ikazawa actually sings. She's cutesy, and definitely putting on an affectation that doesn't directly correspond to her speaking tone, but Ikazawa is also an actress before she's a professional singer. It's clear that she's an amateur, but that's part of the appeal. And of course, neither of the preceding voice banks had ever had any options for Nana to sing in English. One of the songs made with her Reason voice bank, Nana Macne Nana by Kotani, was used in a demo song for her Vocaloid release. Half the song was in its original Japanese, and the other half had new English translyrics to show off her bilingual capabilities. A glance in the comments of this demo's YouTube upload shows a pretty good first impression overall. A few people lament that her Vocaloid voice is less powerful than her Utao port, but they generally seem pretty pleased with the brightness and cute tone of her voice. User Arbachik notes that the English voice bank, quote, doesn't sound bored like most English Vocaloids do, which I thought was pretty interesting. Nana's native English contemporaries were voice banks like Oliver and Ivana, who both have very soft voices, but were also recorded to sound like a natural singing voice. Nana, meanwhile, has always had that cutesy voice acting element, so even though I don't think she's that much more energetic than Ivana, it does give a very different impression. Nana also has a very unique English sound because of what I personally think is the strongest Japanese accent of any of the Japanese to English voice banks. Even Hatsune Miku's notoriously marble-mouthed V3 English ultimately had more problems with the muddiness of her tone than the way she said her L's, while Nana just gets words out in a weird way sometimes. Even so, this voice bank could sound really good in the right hands, and it's actually the one that features in her most viewed song of all time. Star of the Show by Ghost has over 3.7 million hits on YouTube, which is all the more impressive considering that it's a re-upload. See, Ghost originally posted Star on September 3rd, 2016, which was a bit of a tumultuous time for them. Their popularity had absolutely exploded in the space of just a few months. Star of the show was itself actually about their difficult relationship with their fans, and their discomfort with the pedestal they had been placed upon by many of them. Hero worship wasn't a good mix with Ghost's pre-existing mental health and self-esteem issues, and Star of the Show was one of several songs from that time that they decided to delete to get some breathing room for a while. However, they did eventually put Star back up on January 22nd, 2018, and the view count has crept steadily back up ever since. Ghost has taken a very understandable step back from the spotlight, and if they ever made a comment on why they decided to re-release a song or what they think of it now, I personally haven't seen it. However, I do think the fact that they did has been very good for Nana's popularity overall. There's no real way of proving this, since it's pretty much just based off of my own anecdotal observations, but I do think that Star played a role in boosting the sales of Nana's V4 English when it came out. If you look at all of the English producers who have made their debut pretty much any time after 2016-2017, you can see Ghost's influence on quite a lot of them. And among these downstream creators, Nana pops up pretty frequently in their catalogs. Artists like Imposter, Charcolor, Flurlime, and Lovers have all used Nana for at least one original song. I mean, none of them have made any sort of direct statement like, hey, Ghost was an inspiration to me, and I liked how Ghost used Nana, so I thought I'd try it too. But, I can see the connection. That said, there's even more Nana songs out there, especially Japanese ones, that are more on the lighter, happier pop side, better befitting her cute voice. The electronic producer Ginsuke has used Nana for a lot of his most popular songs. And Nana's most viewed Japanese song is the self-described kawaii future bass track by Luna called Heal Me, released in 2017. He also released another Nana song in 2018 called Tell Me, which, while not a direct sequel, has a very similar vibe. While researching, I also discovered a really cool song called Slow Starter by an artist called Task, and an interesting happy-sad sort of song called Akatsukiya Harumaki Dawn by IL. English juggernaut Circus Bee has also used Nana, though it'd be quicker to list the vocaloids he hasn't used at this point. The song, aptly titled Nana, also engages in a bit of wordplay that I'm honestly surprised more people haven't picked up on. She sings na 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 at the end of each chorus, and I'm pretty sure that bit there is why he went with her as the vocalist rather than any of his other choices. But my personal favorite Nana song is Nice to Me by Eggtan. Egg is an absolutely incredible tuner no matter which voice bank they're using, and that's very much true here even with Nana's quirky, finicky English voice. Nice to Me is also the most recent of the songs I've mentioned, so I'm hopeful that Egg will use Nana again at some point. Nana and Nice to Me both feature her V4 English voice bank, which was released on December 15th, 2016, along with her Japanese V4 bank and the new Macne Petit Vocaloid bank. This time, the Macne Nana project teamed up with Software, the company behind voice banks like Kai Yuki, Hiyama Kiyoteru, Nekomura Iroha, Haruno Sora, who, you'll recall, shares a voice provider with the Macne's Coco, and the synthesizer V version of Kasane Teto. In fact, Nana's box art illustrator this time was Umetani Atoro, who designed Yuki and Kiyoteru. In addition to expanding upon Nana's V3 capabilities, V4 was also Petit's debut on this engine. While her original releases had sounded pretty similar to Nana, and frankly this one does too, they are ultimately voiced by the same person, Petit now has a much more unique sound. It's the same sort of charmingly amateur singing style for both of them, but depending on the tuning, I think Petit does sound like a convincing 10-year-old, which is quite impressive to me considering that Ikezawa was already 40 at the time of recording. And while Petit doesn't have as many originals to her name as her big sister, there's a few hidden gems out there. I liked one called De la Mer Profonde by Momobol, which, despite the French title, is in Japanese. It's got a really cool illustration reimagining Petit's white dress and hat as a sort of a jellyfish. And just recently, Kuifan or Kewpie, and I am not sure about the pronunciation at all, put out an absolutely hilarious duet between Petit and Kai Yuki called Let's Make Our Dads Fall in Love, in which the girls scheme to pair up Macne Papa and Hiyama Kiyoteru. As I record, there's a sequel pending its YouTube premiere called The Falling in Love Part, and I am quite excited. Artists like Kewpie and Eggtan are keeping the Macne family top of mind, but as of recording, there aren't any public plans to update any of them to Vocaloid 6 or any of the other engines that have risen since 2016. That said, the very idea that a Vocaloid character could cross over from one software to another owes a lot to Nana herself. Nana was the first voice synth ever to have started on a different engine and then been licensed as a commercial Vocaloid product. It took a little while for any more to follow in her footsteps, but she set the precedent for several more such moves in the last 5-ish years. Uchaloids Kazuhiki, Gekiyaku, and Shikiroan have all made the jump to Vocaloid 6, while characters like Namine Ritsu are on Ace Studio. And of course, there's the beloved Kasane Teto, who along with Xiaoyu Yao and Oscar joined the Synthesizer V AI lineup. Like I said, there's no plans for Nana and Petit to join them, but I wouldn't complain if there were. In particular, since her accent was so thick on her English voice banks, I'd be very intrigued to hear her sing in English by way of AI cross-language tech. Meanwhile, the Macne's Coco followed a separate precedent when Inoue Kikuko teamed up with Software to voice Haruno Sora. First released for Vocaloid 5 on July 26, 2018, she had two voice libraries called Natural and Cool, reflecting the difference in sound between Coco Black and Coco White. Sora is in the same class of Vocaloids as Ruby, Dex, and Dinah, whose voice providers had all previously released Utao voice banks, namely Macne Hachi, voiced by Misha, Namida by Aki Glancy, and Kenji Bayonota by No Straight Answer, or Sam Blakesley, respectively. Since Zero G has largely moved away from Vocaloid now, as has Power FX, the status of these three is kind of up in the air. But the same cannot be said of Inoue's work. Sora proved reasonably popular despite V5's overall lukewarm reception, and her popularity has only grown with her release for Synthesizer V AI on August 24, 2023. Only Nakata Joji has not made any kind of reappearance in the vocal synth world since Macne Papa's Utao and Macintosh voice banks were shelved. I haven't seen any signs that will change anytime soon, but I wouldn't be opposed to hearing his voice again, though he'd probably get a new character like with Sora. Historically, feminine voice banks have sold a lot better, which is a big reason why there were so many more of them in the early Vocaloid days. There was no real financial incentive to give Nakata a Vocaloid when Nana made the jump, but I think it could be a feasible project if they tried now. After all, Synthesizer V voice banks like Asterion and Frimomen have sold well enough to prove that there's much more of a market now for bass baritone voices. And in the meantime, people are still using the older voice banks. This isn't the easiest episode topic to wrap up since there's been relatively little big news about the Macnes lately, but it's been heartening during my research to see how many people in the fandom still really love Nana and her family. Like I said, there's a fairly popular Western producer releasing a Macne Papa song within a week, and I doubt that was on anybody's vocal synth bingo card for 2025. And that's to say nothing of all the covers that are out there. So, in lieu of a nice pithy thesis, I leave you with a recommendation. Head over to YouTube and look up one of the Macnes, and sort for upload date. Someone's probably made something much more recently than you think, and it's probably going to be pretty good. I mean, it'll at least be better than that cover of Pretty Fly for a White Guy, for what it's worth. 39 big thank yous for listening, everyone. If you haven't yet, follow this pod, leave a review if you're feeling generous, and check out linktree/Happy Synthesizers to find the full suite of social media, listening platforms, transcripts, and sources documents. Happy Synthesizers is written and performed by Kay Judson. The theme music is Ivan Polka, arranged with inspiration from Lloyd Tuma and Automania.